On our anniversary, my husband took his 24-year-old intern to a luxury dinner, while I sat at home waiting in a dress he never saw. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. I'm Grace Miller, and for most of my marriage, I believed I had a good life. I worked long shifts as a nurse, but I always came home with a full heart because I thought I had someone who appreciated me. Colin and I had been together for 8 years, and I honestly believed we understood each other. I didn't want anything flashy for our anniversary, just a quiet night together, a home-cooked meal, a chance to talk and reconnect like we used to. So I planned everything carefully. I bought a dress I thought he'd love, cooked his favorite dinner, set the table the way he liked, and waited. I kept looking at the clock, telling myself he was just caught in traffic or finishing a meeting. When he texted saying he had a work emergency, I tried to stay calm. I didn't want to start a fight or accuse him of anything. Marriage is supposed to be built on trust, right? But as the hours passed, that trust began to feel like a joke I didn't understand yet. I kept the food warm until it dried out. I kept the candles lit until they melted down. I sat on the couch in that dress, pretending everything was fine. But something inside me already knew it wasn't. The next morning, when I learned where he really was, having dinner at one of the most expensive restaurants in the city, something in me cracked quietly. He didn't even try to hide it. He acted normal, kissed my forehead, and went to shower like nothing had happened. I watched him, feeling like a stranger looking at another stranger. That's when I realized my marriage wasn't what I thought it was. I wasn't angry yet. I was confused, embarrassed, and heartbroken. I kept asking myself what I did wrong, why our anniversary didn't matter to him, why he chose someone barely out of college over the woman who stood by him for years. I kept replaying the scene of me sitting at home, all dressed up while he enjoyed a night out with someone else. It was like the world had played a cruel trick on me, and everyone knew the punchline except me. I didn't confront him right away. I wanted to understand what was happening before reacting. But deep down, I felt something shifting. A quiet warning that this was only the beginning, and the truth waiting for me was far worse than a missed dinner. And I had no idea that the choices he made that night would eventually push me to take everything he never thought I'd have the strength to take back. That evening, I wanted everything to feel special. I kept reminding myself that simple moments mattered more than grand gestures, so I made the night warm and personal. I set the table just the way Colin liked, with his favorite plates and the little candles we used to light when we first got married. I cooked his favorite meal slowly, tasting everything twice to make sure it came out right. I even turned on the soft music he always said helped him relax after long days at work. As the house filled with the smell of dinner, I felt hopeful. I kept thinking he would walk through the door any minute, smile at the setup, and appreciate the effort. I wanted us to sit together, talk about our day, and feel like a team again. That's all I wanted. Nothing big, just us. But the clock kept moving. Minutes turned into an hour, and the food started cooling down. When my phone buzzed, I rushed to check it, relieved, thinking he was finally on his way. Instead, it was a short message. "Sorry, big work emergency. I'll be late." No details. No apology. Just a line that felt cold and rehearsed. My heart sank, but I tried to stay calm. I told myself emergencies happen. I told myself he wasn't doing anything wrong. I kept reheating the food, resetting the candles, and trying to keep the night from slipping away completely. But the feeling in my chest grew heavier. Hours passed. The candles melted into puddles of wax. The dinner dried out. The house went quiet. I changed out of my dress because I couldn't stand the feeling of sitting there waiting. I tried sleeping, but even that didn't come easily. Something felt wrong, too wrong to ignore. The next morning, everything made sense. I ran into one of Colin's co-workers in the hospital corridor when I stepped out for a quick coffee. He greeted me casually and said something innocent, something he didn't realize would hit me like a punch to the chest. He said Colin looked sharp in a suit last night at the Westmont. I froze. The Westmont wasn't a normal restaurant. It was a place people saved up for months to visit. Anniversaries, promotions, engagements, those were the kind of nights people went there for. And Colin had never mentioned a work dinner there. Trying to stay calm, I asked who he was with. He answered without hesitation. Oh, he brought his intern, the young one, Lily. They looked like they were having a serious talk. A serious talk. At the most expensive restaurant in town. On our anniversary. with a girl young enough to have been one of my patients during her teenage years. I thanked him and walked away before he noticed my hands shaking. In that moment, the truth I had been trying so hard to avoid finally settled. Colin wasn't late because of work. He wasn't caught in an emergency. He wasn't thinking about me or our anniversary at all. He was out with her. And that was the night my heart stopped defending him and started paying attention. The morning after I learned about the Westmont dinner, I felt numb. I wanted answers, but I didn't want to start a fight I might regret. I poured coffee and tried to act normal when Colin came out of the bathroom. My heart was heavy, but I forced a calm voice. "Colin, last night," I began, keeping my tone soft. "I heard about the Westmont. Can you explain?" He looked at me, blinked, and then smiled as if nothing unusual had happened. "Oh, that," he said lightly. "It was just a work thing. Lily and I were discussing client relations. It was part of team bonding. Nothing more." I studied his face carefully, trying to see the truth in his eyes. But he spoke so effortlessly, with a casual tone that almost convinced me he was telling the truth. Almost. Still, the unease that had started the night before didn't leave. I noticed the subtle changes immediately. Things I hadn't seen before because I had trusted him completely. His phone never left his side. He took calls in private, whispering on the line. He stayed late at work more than usual, coming home drained but distant. Even when he was home, he seemed to float in another world, distracted, impatient, and cold. The small gestures I used to rely on, the hugs, the smiles, the casual teasing, began disappearing. Colin no longer asked about my day, no longer remembered little things I mentioned the day before. There was a wall between us, invisible but real. And every time I asked a question, no matter how gentle, he answered quickly, brushing it off, avoiding eye contact. I tried to hold on to hope, telling myself maybe he was just stressed, maybe work was really tough, maybe the dinner had nothing to do with me. But then little moments kept piling up. The way he laughed a little too long on the phone, the way he quickly ended conversations when I walked in the room, the way he suddenly didn't care about plans we made months ago. Even his body language spoke volumes. I noticed him leaning away during meals, sitting with his back to me on the couch, checking his phone constantly. The intimacy we had slowly vanished, replaced with distance I couldn't ignore. I kept trying to reason with myself, hoping it was all in my head, hoping it wasn't betrayal. But the cracks were too clear. Every lie, every excuse, every sudden cold gesture added another piece to a puzzle I didn't want to see, but couldn't unsee. By the end of that week, it was obvious. Our marriage wasn't the same anymore. Colin wasn't just distracted. He was hiding something. And the distance wasn't accidental. It was deliberate. The man I had trusted, the man I had built my life with, was slowly disappearing, leaving only shadows of the husband I once knew. I realized then that I had a choice. I could either ignore it and suffer silently, or I could start paying attention, really paying attention, to what was happening in my life. The cracks were clear now, and they were only going to get bigger if I didn't act. A few days later, I decided to surprise Colin at his office. I made his favorite sandwich, packed a small salad, and even brought a chocolate bar I knew he liked. I thought maybe seeing me would lighten his mood. Maybe we could talk and bridge the growing distance between us. I carried the lunch in my hands, walking down the familiar hallway of his office building, trying to push away the heaviness in my chest. As I got closer to his floor, I heard voices through the slightly open door of his office. I thought it was a coworker, nothing unusual. But then I caught words that made my stomach drop. "Lily, you're special," Colin was saying. His voice was low, almost intimate. "Grace doesn't understand me anymore. You get me in ways she never will." My hands froze, clutching the lunch bag so tightly it crumpled. I couldn't breathe. I pressed myself against the wall and listened harder, hoping somehow I had misheard, hoping the words didn't mean what I thought they did. But there was no mistake. "Special," he repeated, and I heard Lily laugh softly, the kind of laugh that wasn't meant for a friend or colleague. My heart sank like a stone. Every hope I had held on to for a little normalcy, every excuse I tried to give him, shattered in that moment. I wanted to burst in, scream, demand answers, make him face what he had done. But instead, I did something I never imagined I could. I walked away quietly. I slipped down the hall, kept my head low, and left the building without a word. Outside, the cold air hit my face, but it didn't bring comfort. My mind was spinning, filled with questions, anger, and an ache I couldn't explain. I felt betrayed, humiliated, and completely alone, even though I had been standing next to him just hours before, carrying food made with love. I didn't cry then. I didn't call anyone. I just kept walking, letting the city noises mask my shaking thoughts. That moment changed everything. It wasn't just a mistake or a fleeting feeling. It was deliberate. Colin had chosen someone else over me, over us, over the years we had shared. But as crushed as I felt, a quiet resolve started forming inside me. I knew I couldn't let this continue. I couldn't confront him yet. I needed to plan, to think, to find the right way to protect myself and eventually take control. Walking away, I realized one thing clearly. My life couldn't stay the way it was. Colin had shown me who he really was, and it wasn't the man I married. I wasn't going to react in anger or desperation. I would be patient. I would be strategic. And one day, he would see that underestimating me was his biggest mistake. That day, with the lunch untouched in my hands and my heart shattered, I started plotting the steps that would change everything. Not just for him, but for me. After that day at his office, I felt completely lost. I couldn't believe Colin could betray me so openly, and yet I knew I had to do something. But not in anger, not in a way that would hurt me more. I needed a plan, and I needed guidance. I called my older brother, Ethan, that evening. Ethan had always been the calm voice in our family. He was a lawyer, level-headed, and someone I trusted completely. I told him everything. The missed anniversary, the dinner with Lily, the words I overheard at the office. I could feel my voice shaking, but Ethan didn't interrupt or panic. He just listened. When I finished, he said softly, "Grace, you can't let him control your emotions. Right now, reacting without thinking will only give him the power. You need to gather facts, document everything, and stay calm. Don't think about revenge yet. Think about protecting yourself and knowing the truth." At first, I wanted to argue, to confront him immediately, to scream about what he'd done. But his words made sense. Acting impulsively would only make me vulnerable. I realized he was right. I had spent years trusting Colin, defending him even when things didn't feel right. Now I had to shift. I had to stop being the victim. Over the next few days, I started paying attention. I didn't follow him or invade his privacy in a way that would get me in trouble. Instead, I observed carefully. I noticed the times he left work late, the unusual phone calls, the messages that seemed to disappear too quickly. I made notes in a small notebook, documenting dates, times, and details I could verify. I also started listening more closely when he talked, trying to pick up the tone of his words and any hidden meaning. I didn't confront him, didn't argue, didn't let him see my suspicion. I learned to keep my face neutral, my questions casual, my presence calm. Every interaction became part of the bigger picture I was slowly putting together. It wasn't easy. I felt hurt, angry, and betrayed every day. But instead of letting those feelings control me, I let them fuel my focus. I was no longer just his wife. I was a woman who needed to know the truth before making any decisions about her life. Ethan checked in often, reminding me to stay patient. Facts are your weapon, Grace. You can't win with emotion alone. And he was right. I began to feel a quiet strength building inside me. I wasn't powerless anymore. By the end of that week, I realized something important. I could survive this. I could protect myself. And when the time came, I could take control, not in a rash outburst, but in a way that would ensure I didn't lose myself again. For the first time since the betrayal, I felt like I had a plan, a purpose, and a direction. I wouldn't be a victim. Not anymore. While I was quietly gathering documents and organizing records for my own understanding, I stumbled upon something I never expected. A routine check of our finances, something I had always done carefully, trusting Colin completely, revealed a hidden truth. Colin had secretly opened a joint account with Lily, the intern he'd been seeing behind my back. I stared at the screen in disbelief. The numbers didn't lie. Months of our savings, money we had painstakingly built together for our future home, for trips we had dreamed about, had been quietly transferred to this account. He had taken what was meant for us, for our life together, and given it to her. My hands shook as I scrolled through the transactions. Small amounts at first, just enough to avoid notice, then larger transfers that made my chest tighten. It wasn't just betrayal in words or in moments. It was betrayal in action, in planning, in taking something I had worked so hard to help build and handing it to someone completely undeserving. I sat down heavily, trying to process it. The betrayal had shifted from emotional to financial, and suddenly everything I had believed about our marriage felt like a lie. This wasn't just about feelings or trust anymore. It was about my security, my future, the life I thought we were building together. Colin hadn't just betrayed me, he had stolen from me. At first, I felt the urge to explode, to call him, to confront him immediately. But I remembered Ethan's advice. I needed facts, not anger. I needed strategy, not impulsiveness. I began documenting everything: account numbers, transfer dates, amounts. I made copies of statements, screenshots, and emails. Every detail mattered. Something inside me began to shift at that moment. The hurt and humiliation I had been feeling for weeks turned into a quiet, burning resolve. This wasn't just about taking care of myself emotionally anymore. I needed to protect what was rightfully mine. And if Colin thought he could get away with it, he was wrong. I also realized how carefully he had tried to cover his tracks, how clever he thought he was. But cleverness didn't matter if I paid attention, if I stayed calm and collected. I had been blindsided, yes, but now I could see the pattern, and with the right steps, I could take back control. For the first time since discovering his affair, I felt something approaching clarity. I wasn't just hurt anymore. I was aware. I was focused. The betrayal had crossed a line, but crossing that line had also awakened something in me. Colin hadn't just broken my heart. He had awakened a determination in me that no one could ignore. And from that moment, I knew that I wouldn't let him walk away with anything. Not my money, not my dignity, and certainly not my future. After discovering the hidden account and the stolen savings, I knew I couldn't face this alone. I reached out to Ethan, my older brother, and explained everything in detail. He didn't panic or tell me what to feel. Instead, he laid out a calm, clear plan. "Grace," he said, "you need to protect yourself and your future. Gather everything, document everything, and stay patient. This isn't about revenge yet. It's about making sure you're not blindsided again." We started by going through all our bank statements, line by line. I didn't just look at obvious transfers. I checked the smaller ones too, the ones meant to slip under notice. I noted every payment, every withdrawal, and every suspicious transaction. Ethan helped me organize it so that later, if needed, it could be used as solid evidence. Next, we moved to conversations. I began keeping a quiet record of phone calls and discussions that involved finances, work, and personal plans. Nothing illegal, just notes about what was said and when. Even offhand comments that now seemed suspicious went into the notebook. Ethan explained that details mattered. In situations like this, the little things could make a huge difference. I also gathered copies of insurance policies, joint agreements, and property documents. Anything that could be tied to our marriage or our assets was carefully photocopied and stored. I wanted everything documented so that when the time came to take action, I would have proof that couldn't be denied or questioned. Every day, I checked, noted, and recorded. I paid attention to Colin's habits, his financial decisions, and the patterns of his behavior. I didn't confront him. I didn't argue. I simply collected information and stayed calm. The heartbreak was still there, gnawing at me, but I refused to let it cloud my judgment. Ethan also helped me think through possible scenarios. What would happen if I filed for divorce, what steps I could take to secure my assets, and how to make sure I wasn't left vulnerable. Each piece of advice was practical, not emotional, which was exactly what I needed. Through all of this, I began to feel a quiet strength building inside me. The hurt was still raw, but it was no longer paralyzing. I wasn't a passive victim waiting for Colin to make the next move. I was preparing, planning, and staying ahead. Every statement copied, every note written, every piece of evidence gathered was a small victory, a way to reclaim control of a life that had suddenly felt out of my hands. By the end of the week, I felt more focused than I had in months. The betrayal had been devastating, but it also pushed me to act wisely. My revenge, if it came, wouldn't be impulsive or loud. It would be deliberate, calm, and unstoppable. And most importantly, I would be ready for it. A few weeks later, I decided it was time. I didn't want a scene, a scream, or a fight. I wanted control. I prepared dinner the same way I had on our anniversary. The same table, the same quiet lighting. But this time, there were no romantic intentions. This time, the night was for me. When Colin arrived, he smiled, expecting the same wife who had always waited for him, the same woman who forgave and overlooked. I greeted him calmly, poured a glass of wine, and gestured to the seat across from me. In front of him, instead of a carefully cooked meal meant to charm, I placed a thick folder. He raised an eyebrow, a small smirk forming. "What's this?" he asked casually, trying to appear amused. I didn't answer. I simply opened the folder and slid it toward him. Inside were the organized bank statements, copies of insurance policies, documented transactions, and my notes of phone calls and conversations. There were emails and small details that proved every lie he had told, every step of his betrayal, and every financial move he had made behind my back. Colin's smirk faltered. He picked up a sheet, glanced at it, then looked at me. "Grace, what is all this?" His voice was steady, but there was an edge of nervousness I had never heard before. I leaned back in my chair, calm, almost serene. "This," I said softly, "is everything you thought I didn't know. Every secret dinner, every transfer, every lie. I know what you've done, Colin. And Lily knows too. She's not answering your calls anymore." The color drained from his face. His confidence, the arrogance that had built up over weeks of deceit, crumbled in an instant. He opened his mouth, tried to speak, but no words came out. The air between us shifted. The man who had made me feel powerless was suddenly exposed, vulnerable, and terrified. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't beg or plead. I just sat there, letting him feel the weight of his choices. The folder represented more than proof. It represented control I had reclaimed, dignity he had tried to steal, and the end of the life he thought he could manipulate. Minutes passed like hours. I watched him scan page after page, his hands trembling slightly. I saw fear flicker in his eyes, and for the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace. This wasn't revenge in a dramatic, public way. It was deliberate, quiet, and complete. When the evening ended, I cleared my side of the table calmly and left him there, staring at the evidence of everything he had done. I knew this confrontation would change everything. I knew it would mark the beginning of the consequences he deserved. And just like that, the power had shifted. Colin's world, carefully built on lies and manipulation, was beginning to fall apart, and I was the one who had orchestrated it, silently and strategically, while staying fully in control. After that night, I realized there was no going back. The betrayal, the lies, the financial manipulation, it was all too much to ignore. With Ethan's guidance, I began the legal steps to protect myself. I filed for divorce, making sure every document, every piece of evidence, and every financial record was in order. I wasn't leaving blindly. I was leaving fully prepared. Colin tried to act as if nothing had changed, but the moment the legal papers were served, the cracks in his life became impossible to hide. The divorce process revealed everything he had done: the secret account, the transfers, and the misuse of marital assets. Legally, he had no leverage. He lost half of his savings and investments, everything he had tried to hide or manipulate. The money he thought he could take from me was no longer his. At work, things started to unravel too. The affair with Lily, which he had assumed would remain private, became known to his supervisors during the legal proceedings. They launched an internal investigation into his conduct with an intern. Suddenly, Colin's professional reputation, the one he had carefully built, was at risk. He faced questions, scrutiny, and a level of exposure he had never anticipated. And then there was Lily. She had been the other half of his secret life, but when complications began, she quickly disappeared. Messages went unanswered, calls were ignored. She suddenly had to focus on her career, conveniently abandoning Colin at the exact moment his carefully constructed world began to collapse. Everything he had relied on to feel secure, money, appearances, and the illusion of control, was gone. I watched it unfold quietly, without gloating, without needing to witness his panic directly. My life was my priority, and I had taken control of it. Colin's desperation, his failed plans, and his exposure were all consequences of his own actions. Every choice he had made, every lie he had told, was now turning against him. Meanwhile, I began to rebuild my life. I found a small apartment that felt safe and peaceful. I reconnected with friends and family I had distanced myself from. I focused on work and on myself, reclaiming the stability and independence that Colin had tried to undermine. The sense of betrayal was still there, but it no longer controlled me. I had the clarity, the strength, and the security that I had lacked for months. Colin's world had fallen apart, but mine was being rebuilt. I didn't need revenge in the dramatic sense. The law, the truth, and his own choices had delivered the consequences he deserved. I had walked away with everything that mattered: my dignity, my independence, and my peace of mind. For the first time in a long while, I felt free. Free from lies, free from manipulation, and free from a marriage that had never truly been equal. Colin lost his world, and I finally gained mine. After the divorce was finalized, I moved into a small apartment close to my brother Ethan. It wasn't extravagant, but it was mine, quiet, safe, and peaceful. For the first time in months, I could breathe without the weight of lies and betrayal pressing down on me. The apartment became a place where I could think, reflect, and start rebuilding the life I had almost lost. I focused on simple routines at first, making my own breakfast without worrying about anyone else's schedule, going for walks in the neighborhood, and sitting with a cup of coffee in the mornings. I started to notice small joys I had ignored before. The way sunlight fell across the living room floor, the quiet hum of the city outside, the freedom to make my own choices. These small moments became anchors, reminders that I could exist fully on my own. Work became a source of strength too. I threw myself into my nursing, helping patients, learning new skills, and regaining the confidence I had lost while being consumed by the chaos of Colin's betrayal. Each day I returned home with a sense of accomplishment and pride that had nothing to do with him. I reconnected with friends and family I had drifted away from over the years. Ethan was always nearby, offering advice when needed but never overstepping. My support network reminded me that I wasn't alone, and their encouragement helped me see that I had the strength to rebuild not just my life, but my sense of self. Over time, I realized something important. I never needed Colin to feel complete. The love, respect, and stability I had sought from him were things I could provide for myself. I began to set boundaries, make plans for my future, and dream again. My confidence returned slowly but steadily, like a plant growing through cracks in concrete. I didn't need dramatic revenge to feel satisfaction. Colin had lost what he valued most: control, money, and his reputation. I didn't have to yell, expose him publicly, or create a scene. My victory was quiet, steady, and absolute. It was in reclaiming my dignity, securing my future, and building a life free of manipulation and lies. Sometimes I think about that night at the Westmont, the secret accounts, and the betrayal. And I smile quietly, not out of anger, but because I see clearly how far I've come. I am stronger, wiser, and more independent than I ever imagined. My life isn't about him anymore. It's about me, my peace, my stability, and my happiness. I walk my own path, fully aware of my worth, and fully in control of my future. That, in itself, is the quietest and most complete victory of all.